So what's on watches, it's something that I've always really wanted to do, but never really knew how to do it. I quit my job in the watch industry and I went, I'm just gonna launch this and see what happens.
I got this watch in person and I remember sending messages to my friends saying this is the most beautiful thing I've ever owned in my entire life.
Modern watch, you know, you may make £10,000 overnight, but you may also lose £10,000 overnight.
If someone came in wearing a Rolex Daytona, I quickly learned to recognise that you should go speak to that person. Yeah, it's live by the sword, die by the sword.
Gents, we're here in Glasgow.
Yeah.
There's been some cultural reappropriation.
Yeah, we've got our book fast.
But we're in fine form.
Yeah.
And I think when I've been watching your content over the last few months, I knew this was going to happen, but I guess I just wanted to wait till you guys were in a position where you were like excited to talk about it. And there's been a few trigger moments, notably Tom recently going full time in the business, which I think is pretty exciting when you consider you were the one that actually started it in the first place.
Yeah, it's been a wild couple of months. I think that's fair to say. Yeah, it's been really good. So what's on watches was an idea of mine for years, really. It's something that I've always really wanted to do, but never really knew how to do it realistically. I've worked in the watch industry since I was 16 and I've always enjoyed it, and I completely love watches and have done since I was too young to really understand what watches were. And then, I worked in the watch industry and I was looking at my career and I was looking at how high that career can go. And I was like, well, that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is sell watches that I love. And then, so What's on Watches was born. It was an idea. And
what year are we talking about you took action on that?
First founded it, actually, it's a very funny story. We covered it in one of our reels. I was sat there and my other half might be listening to this, but she told me she was going to, I have a daughter, and she told me I was going to be a father. And I was like, well, if I don't do it now, I never will. There'll always be an excuse not to. And it's always something I dreamt about. So I actually sat there at Christmas, December 2021, and I went, I'm just going to launch this and see what happens. So set up the business, secured all the domain names, secured all the social media handles. And I was like, okay. And as we covered in the reel, what do you do now? You've got to risk capital. You've got to risk absolutely everything. And obviously my career was in the watch industry, and if anybody caught wind of what I was doing, I'd lose my job. I'd lose everything.
Is that frowned upon then to have a side hustle in that space?
God, yeah. I was working for the Swatch Group, so that's Omega, Longines, Breguet, Blancpain. You get caught selling secondhand watches, working in that domain, then your career's done. So it was a huge risk, and that's when Josh came into the picture. So Josh and I were, I think it was probably about January. I'd just pretty much, I had the idea and was setting it up, and Josh was sat in the middle of the Red Sea, as he likes to tell me, and we were texting, and I was like, I'm actually quitting my job once I'm in a position to do so. I'm going to launch this business. And obviously Josh is fantastic with photography, that sort of thing. And he, it all started off with, well, why don't you come and take some pictures of the watches? Let's start it like that. I quit my job in the watch industry and went into, if you can believe it, selling roofing material, just to sort of see myself through in the meantime.
So by going and doing that, you didn't have any covenants or restrictions on selling watches.
Exactly.
But you still had the, I want to say reassurance, but
the security
support
net.
of an income, but in an industry that you didn't have
it was an industry that,
you.
no offense to the people that I worked with, no offense, but it was horrendous. I was so not in my element. It was very, very different, but I knew it was something that I needed to do if I actually wanted to commit to this business. So then Josh came off ship. He was still traveling down south and back up north and down south, and we started taking some pictures. Then we actually met in Leeds. We were meant to start, the day we were meant to meet and launch it was the day my daughter was born. So he had to, we were meant to meet up in Leeds and get everything arranged. And I had to
probably mention the watch as well.
Oh yeah, I will mention the watch. Good point. But I texted him that morning. I was like, listen, mate, going to have to postpone our meeting. My other half's in labour. So, you're going to have to hold off on that. Which he was like, oh, God damn it, I've just taken a day out. No, Jack, he wasn't like that. He was very good. And he actually that day bought an Omega Speedmaster. So that's why when he comes to sell his Speedmaster, I'll be buying it because it's got my daughter's date of birth on the card, which is very cool. So anyway, a week later, we met up and it just went from there. So Josh manages all the social media, all the marketing.
How did you two get in touch in the first place? Did you know each other prior?
Yeah, in a weird and wonderful way.
We went to school with each other, but obviously when you're in secondary school, if someone's in the year above you, you don't speak to them. They're the enemy.
Yeah.
You know,
and if you couldn't
get their
You play
football,
football at lunch,
and you kick it into the farmer's field. So we didn't really speak to each other. But, you know, as you get a bit older and you go through college and things, and I think I was working at Bose at the time, the speakers, headphones, that kind of thing. I saved up some money for a really nice watch. And I knew Tom worked at a jeweller's because he always used to post watches he didn't own on his Instagram, much like we do now, actually. Well,
Some synergy there.
We do own them, but so I said to him, like, oh, how you doing, mate? You know, a bit of small talk and, you know, looking for a watch. Can you do me a bit of discount? And yeah, the watch I bought was a Mega Seamaster, the Seamaster 300 ceramic. Bought it off you. You gave me a healthy discount. And that's sort of how this all started rolling.
So that was when I was working in the judge. But the weird irony of it all is that obviously Josh is, if you couldn't tell by looking at us, a little bit younger than me. And we actually lived on the same street in the same village. We went to the same schools and everything, but we just didn't really have that much in common because Josh was a little bit younger. So it was only when Josh got into watches that we started that.
That was the connection.
Yeah, that was the connection.
That makes total sense. And see, post school, post university, post whatever you've been up to, that kind of takes you up into like your early to mid 20s. You drift apart from so many people, but then you end up connected with other people through other interests as well. And the really funny part of this story is that I knew Josh back in 2017.
Johnny not his New Year's party.
Yeah, but through fitness content creation on Instagram, because that's how CamBro was CamBros, and Josh had a fitness page which boomed back then.
Yeah, with Bryce.
Yep.
Yeah, me and Bryce were the dynamic duo. We was on that ride.
Yeah,
together.
Body power, looking for
yeah.
a sponsorship with like Machine Fitness, and it was all kind of
we never
ticking
made
along.
it that far, but we did. I can't
It's like an Optimum nutrition event. I remember that.
we had we weren't sponsored by Optimum per se, but we'd get either an Optimum or a BSN parcel every couple months, and get invited to their events and things. So you know, did all right.
That was like probably your first foray into content creation.
Yeah,
and then there was like, and it was relatively successful, albeit your passion for it clearly fell away.
Yeah.
But it probably taught you some lessons that you've gone on to
100%
employ with the content you create. Because if you look at the age of what's on watches, the content you put out there is as good as other people in the space who've been doing it for years and probably have a larger team, a larger production behind it. And that's one of the things that we're definitely going to talk about, how important that's been within the business, et cetera, which of course is vital. But it's funny that if you look at what you were interested in, what age would you have been then? Like 16?
I think the whole fitness journey thing started from late 15, started doing things on Instagram around 16 and ended around 19.
Yeah. Because you grew quite quick and you had a following, but as soon as you were out of it, you were like out of it. You just did you stop training for a while as well?
Yeah, I don't train now, mate. To be honest with you,
unbelievable.
I don't train.
I know
now.
It's mental, isn't it? If you look at him and he doesn't even train.
This polo just makes you look really good. That's why I wore it.
But it's funny you say that, because it's actually when Josh was building that social media, because obviously I knew Josh and I'd sold him a watch and I knew of his social media background through the fitness page. And I'd seen what he'd also done on his photography page, that I saw, well, he's got experience, in building a social media platform. He's got experience in photography. He'd be perfect. Because I don't mind saying I have a personal Instagram account and I have 51 followers who I selectively choose who can follow me
to let you behind the wall. I understand that.
And I have had an older Instagram account, but I'm not a big social media advocate. I thoroughly enjoy doing the social media stuff we do, but on a personal level, I'm like, you know what stays behind that wall stays behind that wall. But Josh had seen the experience he'd got, and that is half the reason why I was like, well, why don't you come on board, and why don't you come into, and obviously with both of our experiences combined, it's worked incredibly well so far.
I think that's the exciting thing. We were talking about Andrew Craig before we hit record, who's been a guest on this show. And Andrew, at the end of the second time I interviewed him for episode 200, was talking about a framework for finding what you might want to do in your sweet spot.
Yeah.
And he was saying, at the age of 12, what would you be interested in doing? And if you had £1 billion, what would you be doing? Because obviously you'd be free of like the cynicism that you build up during your teens and your 20s and maybe the weight of the world that comes on. And then fiscally, you're free to explore things as well. And if you look at you, Josh, like creating stuff, building content, doing stuff. Tom, you loved watches. Okay, Josh now loves watches. That obviously developed as well. But you combine the two and you can quite quickly see how what you do is, of course, work. but it's a lot. The kind of common phrase is like the tools are lighter in your hands than they would be in somebody that doesn't have the same level of energy and passion.
100%. I couldn't make the content that Josh does. I have no real background in video editing or anything like that, and
neither did I when we started this business.
Yeah, true. But
you just had an eye for it more so, though.
But my eye was the watches. My eye was the watch experience, and Josh's eye was making them watches come to life through social media platforms. So when they both come together, it just works really well. And there is a third member who isn't here at the moment, but Lewis, who's our
big shout out to Lewis.
Shout out to Lewis Harding. Yeah, he's our finance director, but he's
also a partner in the business. Yeah, not just the finance.
Yeah, he's finance director partner. He does all of our numbers behind the scenes. So there's three of us. We have somebody doing the numbers. We've got somebody doing the content. We've got somebody doing the actual selling and the dealing, and we've got all of these different domains. And when you combine them together, it's a real sweet mix.
Can I ask, Josh, when did the watches side of things become an interest to you? Because I remember speaking to you about it passionately, probably not long after I started the pod.
Yeah, it was when I left college and I started working not full time, but basically full time for Bose. And a lot of the guys in there had like a guy who used to work with Tag Heur. He used to wear a really nice Panerai every day, and at first I didn't appreciate it. And as the more I got to speak to him, he'd say like, "Oh, that's a cool Casio you've got on," that kind of thing. And but, "Oh, what have you got on?" Like not knowing anything about it, and then you learn a bit more, and then the sales side of things came into it. Like, I don't want to say I was prejudiced, but if someone came in wearing a Rolex Daytona, I quickly learned to recognize that you should go speak to that person, because if you want to sell them $6,000 worth of surround sound equipment, they're probably a good person to ask. And the way I learned watches, like at least recognizing the brands and the models, was from sales.
They would be a good prospect.
Don't get me wrong, if someone didn't have a fancy watch on, of course I still went and spoke to them, because there's been so many times where someone you wouldn't expect to spend $2,000 to $6,000, they would, right? But you could make an educated guess at who was about to buy some stuff.
So interesting. So that lit your interest in like, oh, I wonder what watch he's wearing.
Definitely. And then I inherited one when I was 18.
Okay. What watch did you inherit?
An Omega de Ville Prestige in 18 karat gold, quartz, because it's from the 80s. But I inherited that watch, and once I got the watch in person, everyone at work told me to go for that one. There was a choice of two between me and another family member. And it's not the most expensive watch in the world. In fact, in terms of watches, it's actually quite cheap relatively to watches, because they're obviously an expensive thing. And I got this watch in person, and I remember sending messages to my friends saying, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever owned in my entire life." And no matter how expensive a watch might be that comes from my hands, that will always be the one watch that's the most important to me. And it was my grandparents that gave it to me.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about valuing watches and how on earth we do that. But there is a sentimental element to all of these things in terms of I bought that watch, or I got that watch at this point in time. You're saying that you're going to buy is it the Speedmaster you're going to buy from him, because it's the same date as your daughter's.
And I'm going to charge him through the roof.
Yeah, of course you are.
Through the roof. Supply and demand. Yeah. How many of them have got that date on the card?
Yeah, it's but again, it's funny that you talk about Bose, and again, it's the weird situation about this all. You were working at Bose in the York Designer Outlet. I was working for the York Designer Outlet with my first ever job in the watch industry. So we worked in the same shopping centre, went to the same school, grew up on the same street, and somehow I've ended up here, even though we never really had that much in common, which is a bit strange, really. But yeah, I remember obviously going in to see Josh at Bose because we had mutual friends and that sort of thing. But yeah, that was my first ever job in the watch industry, was working in the same shopping centre for Tag Heuer.
It is wild, the number of overlaps.
It must have been written in the stars without believing in fate. We make our own fate, but something was obviously there at that point.
Yeah, completely agree. In terms of what you do now, would you describe it as watch dealers?
100%. Yeah.
So you did a reel that was extremely popular, extremely viral. How would you describe what a watch dealer does?
Well, everyone should go check out the reel on What's on Watches.
Yeah, get some more views on it. Yeah,
go check out that. I mean, how to become a watch dealer? There was a bit of
Well, the first point was a massive hill.
Yeah, there's a little bit of irony with it. We did make it quite lighthearted, and it's not as simple as it comes.
Well, we said how to be a watch dealer in 60 seconds, but the first step is quit your job in the watch industry of 8 years.
Yeah. So you need some experience, because obviously if you're going to go into watch dealing, you need to know what you're looking at. So you need to obviously learn watches. Part of that is, of course, authentication, which is a huge problem that the watch industry faces. You know, there's lots of fakes out there. You've got to know what you're looking at. You've got to know what carries value and what doesn't. But in terms of being a watch dealer, I mean, I think it might sound a bit arrogant, but I think we are a little bit different. I think we obviously we sell watches every day, and we speak to clients and we have that client relation, but we also, like I say, we have two people under the same umbrella. We have somebody making content every day about watches, informative content. We have Josh making, you know, a video about why this watch is special, videos about the industry, but then you also have myself who's speaking to clients every day. And so we cover sort of both domains, which is, I think, part of the reason why it has worked so well so far, is because we have content going out all the time informing people, but we also have sales going on at the same time as well, which seems to be the dynamic. And, you know, I think I often refer to him as probably the person who sort of made a bit of a template about that, but Nico Leonard, he is one of the most famous, if not the most famous watch dealer in the world. And he does the content side of things, and he also does the dealing side of things. And that's what shot him to success. So we do it a very, very different way, but we are watch dealers. That is our main bread and butter, is we sell watches every day, but we also thoroughly enjoy, and we make content every day that people really enjoy. So it's a beautiful mix. Yeah.
Good. I was fortunate to meet Nico at an event in Glasgow called the Financial Freedom Summit, which he was speaking at.
Oh yeah.
And I had a kind of top tier ticket, so I get to do a Q&A with him afterwards. And he's exactly as you would expect from his YouTube channel, as you can probably guess.
Yeah.
Very real, very raw. Lots of swearing, lots of jokes that would probably get you cancelled if he could be cancelled, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Which I think's a great position to be in. He's kind of in that kind of fuck you money position where he can basically say what he wants. Yeah. And it was really interesting to hear him speak about growth in that area, because I guess until somebody like him, content in the watch game would have been maybe a bit more mellow and a bit more like, here's this watch, and quite prim and proper.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
Interesting.
Have you seen Watchfinder?
No. So this is an interesting point. Like, I've seen yours and his pretty much in terms of content in that space, because and we'll probably talk about my own more recent interest in watches, but I appreciate it from like an aesthetic perspective. I appreciate the history, etc., but I don't consume it. I don't have the same energy and passion for it that you guys, because you guys are like you were talking about Josh reacting to like news and content, like you're pulling up a GQ article like, oh, this has been released by Omega, here's what it means for what's coming next. Interestingly, in previous history they did this, and it's just like so detailed, but distilled down into like a 30-second reel for everyone's attention span nowadays.
That is the really difficult part when it comes to producing the content. And this is why, you know, Josh puts me in front of a camera, and we did a video recently. Well, it wasn't actually recent. It was about 7 months ago. We were like, oh, we'll film a 12-minute video about these watches. And I was like, yeah, cool, we'll get it down to 12 minutes. I could ramble on forever about watches, realistically. I think we did a 30-minute video, and realistically we needed 12. So a lot of it got cut out. So it is, but that's obviously, again, Josh's domain, where he's got to create something that is, here's the information cut down into a 1-minute format and still make it interesting.
Sometimes it doesn't work. So like sometimes there is topics where you can't speak about it in a 60, ideally you want it to be 60 seconds because then it fits onto YouTube Shorts as well. But like sometimes special occasions I'll go into the 90-second category, but sometimes it just doesn't work because you try and make a point and you haven't got enough time to explain yourself, and you know what comments are coming, Carl. You'll sympathise with this.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better just to not talk about that topic or not mention it for your own well-being's sake, having to reply and answer questions.
It's interesting because nowadays, if you caveat everything that you say, you never say anything at all.
Yeah.
If you fear the comment section, which I appreciate sometimes, and I've had that recently, I've reached the wrong side of the internet with self-development
The dark
content.
web.
Yeah. Not even just like self-loathing side of the internet where like, how dare you speak about personal agency? And I'm like, oh, right, I'm just not getting involved in this.
We've been there. We've received a lot of hate.
But if you caveat every single thing that you say so that it applies to absolutely everyone, you speak to no one. And your audience they're not super specific, but they're people that are interested in nice watches that might cost more than the average watch, because
they do, if you don't say something that aligns with the watch they've got, You've raised hell. You have raised hell.
So you did bring up Nico. You guys had a very short-lived YouTube spat with him. And he's a bit of a hero for you guys as well in terms of somebody you look up to in the space. What was it like What was it like when he called you an arrogant prick?
It was fine because it's all part of the game. And he even texted us after because, Tom texted him and said, funny video, etc. And he was like, oh, mate, I just sit down and react to what the production team put in front of me. Like no hard feelings, all part of the game. Which is fine because I don't actually think someone with a Tag Heuer is boring or anything. It was just, a poke of fun at a stereotype, a caricature of which is something we put in the description that I didn't read, and add that into his reaction.
But such is the nature of short form content. Somebody sees something and you get their immediate visual reaction.
It's live by the sword, die by the sword.
The irony of that entire situation as well was because we made that video saying average Tag Heuer customer coming into a conversation, and if you actually read the direct description underneath, we'd actually just put some Tag Heuers on the website, and that was the irony about the situation. It was just a light-hearted joke to attract Tag customers, and then, oh, by the way, we have some Tag Heuers to sell at this moment in time.
What's going on with that brand? Because you were a little bit critical of some of the stuff that's happened.
Oh, 100%. So that's where my career started. I started with Tag Heuer and I was working in their outlet store. And again, no disrespect to Tag Heuer, but some of the watches that we were trying to sell, they were horrendous. So that's when Josh and we sat down and we made that video about where has Tag Heuer gone wrong and the issues that they face and the lack of identity. And we have nothing against vintage Heuer. I mean, I was actually going to wear a vintage Heuer today. I was going to wear a beautiful vintage Carrera, Valjoux 72 movement, a real work of art. But the modern Tag Heuer really lost its way, particularly in the 80s when Tag took over Heuer and they started making plastic watches. A very similar sort of business model. Blank pan swatch, Omega swatch, that sort of thing. They started making entry-level watches to appeal to a mass audience and they lost a lot of their DNA. But we were literally having this conversation earlier. I'm not saying ever since making that video, they haven't exactly listened to us, but we went to Watches and Wonders and it was your favourite stand of the entire day.
It stood out.
Yeah, for sure. They've really took some positive steps. Like some of the stuff we spoke about in that YouTube video, they've actioned perfectly. Yes, it's as if, watch people don't need to make the comment. It's as if they're very self-aware of what they need to do. And that's bringing back the heritage, scaling down some of the case sizes, because that's the way the pendulum's swinging nowadays, especially in the younger demographic. A lot of people are taking note of the vintage cues and they want to see that. And that's exactly what they've done. It's class.
Yeah. What do you see as trends then? One of the trends you've called out there in the wider industry is a smaller watch.
Yeah. So for a long time, sort of 42, 44 millimeters, bright then, that kind of thing was very popular. And now people are scaling it back. It's maybe gone too far, which is my personal preference, but everyone's different. Obviously, we sell vintage watches. So with things like a Datejust, one of our most popular watches, 36mm is standard. They're sports watches of the time. You're looking at about 40mm, that kind of thing. I mean, am I right in saying some of the Daytonas were even 38?
Yeah, so back in the day, obviously, the original Daytona and that sort of sports model was a 37mm, 38mm model. Yeah. And that was considered a sports watch at the time. And that would have been considered large. I mean, you only have to look back at when Patek launched one of the first ever Nautiluses and it was 40mm and it blew everyone's mind because it was huge.
Because it was bigger than what
it was massive, like I say, I'm wearing a 36mm watch today. You're wearing a 36mm watch today.
Correct, yeah.
That is the correct case size for pretty much the majority of Rolexes, controversial to what most people believe. It's fact. But yeah, a sports watch, it had, 3 sub-counters on the dial and it was 37mm because it didn't need to be any bigger. So, and vintage cues and vintage case size is massively coming back in now. And that's why I think brands like Cartier over the last few years, we've seen an absolute boom because iconic models, Tank, Santos, them sort of things, which are very, very traditional in their design. People aren't going out now and saying, oh, I want to buy a watch. It's going to be expensive. And I want everybody to see that I'm wearing it. Understated, that and I hate to comment on trends, but that old money, very classy aesthetic is massive at the moment.
It is popular, yeah. I completely see that as well. And there is a reason that people work with guys like yourselves because maybe the modern watches aren't catering for the look aesthetic that they're going for. And then alongside that, there is the investment angle too, which I was really keen to ask you about, because some people buy a watch for how it looks and maybe what it means to mark an occasion, but other people are buying them from an investment standpoint. In your opinion, as experts in the space, what maybe makes a watch suitable to classify as an investment rather than just a luxury
there's
purchase?
a big misconception with this, right? And there's two ways you can do this, in my opinion, and it's either being chummy with an AD, whether that's Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and being chummy enough, which means spending a lot of money to actually be offered the very in-demand pieces that, in theory, you could flip straight from the source to the secondary market, but you also run the risk of never being sold a watch from that.
Would you be
dealer
blacklisted for behaviour like that potentially?
It's very common. It's very common, but there is ways and means around it. And then the other way you can do it is, if you're looking at the secondary market, the smarter investment side of things, it's less volatile, would be vintage. But the thing is, Cole, and people are going to think this is counterintuitive from our perspective, but if you're truly looking to invest in a vintage watch, you're going to need a lot of capital, because vintage watch dealers will tell you all the time that, you might get your money back on a date just if you keep it and you're patient, but that's not an investment. People invest to make money, and that's spotting things that cost a lot of money in the vintage watch world. Stuff like, I said, a Mark 1 Daytona, for example. I can't remember which other options you came up, but I said a Mark 1 dial Daytona is probably a good shout at the moment. But like Paul Newman's, for example, they had the record for auction. That's a lot of money cost.
And that's a high return on investment. Whereas one of the terms that I would use for a watch is potentially a store of value.
Yeah.
So for example, for argument's sake, the date just that I purchased from you gents.
Yeah.
I would expect if I sold it tomorrow to be roughly the same. Now that's 6 months on. I expect if I sold it in 2 years' time to be roughly the same, maybe a tiny bit more depending. Or somewhere in the ballpark. So it is a store of value versus other potentially luxury purchases that you would consider, like a car, maybe like clothing. I think in the female sector, handbags and stuff would sit separate depending on what brand they wear as well, if they're iconic. But watches do differ from a number of other maybe more high value, extravagant purchases.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at, and we have nothing against modern, let's say, dealers. We work with modern dealers who maybe deal in vintage stuff. But like Josh said, the volatility of the modern watch market is one of the main issues that people may face. And I think we saw a lot of that in COVID. COVID, nobody can go away. Nobody can really spend any form of money. Nobody can do anything. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to, like you say, store of wealth, put some money away. Oh, I'm going to buy a watch. And we saw that the modern watch market particularly went skyrocket. People going out and buying brand new Submariners, brand new Daytonas. And obviously with that, we saw a surge in demand, which means prices go up, naturally. But then when the reality came back in and, the furlough stepped away and the reality came back to it and people had to go back to work, the prices nosedived. And that is what I say to a lot of customers that are coming to us when comparing buying a vintage watch to a modern watch. I often say, well, a modern watch, you may make £10,000 overnight, and that's great. But you may also lose £10,000 overnight because you've bought at the peak of the market and you are controlled by, all that's stopping the modern watch market from falling directly on its rear is if Rolex tomorrow went, you know what, we're just going to release 5 million watches and we're going to flood the market and everybody can have what they want. And then all of a sudden there's no demand in the second-hand market. Whereas with the vintage stuff, they're never
going to produce more.
Never going to produce more. They're never going to be made again. There may be only one of 5 of them ever made that was a custom order for a certain market. And you've got that scarcity, which in the vintage watch market, and when you're wanting to invest, scarcity is a massive aspect of it, which people really like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it is controversial though, like if you were to wear something that you deem to be a very big investment for you, you're actually putting it at risk. So you do need to make yourself whole internally that yes, it might be an investment. Yes, it might return something for me in the future, but I'm going to wear it now and I'm comfortable with that potential risk. Yeah,
I mean, it's one of the very few, if you want to call it an investment or a star wealth, that you can actually enjoy. And we tell people to enjoy them. I mean, like I said, Josh has covered it a million times in the videos. Buy the watch that you like and enjoy it, because it is what you need to do and what you want to do. It's a nice thing, and you should. I mean, if you are buying solely for an investment, yes, of course, you're probably going to get a little bit more if it's still got its stickers on and shoved in a safe. But enjoy it. It's still a luxury purchase that you've worked hard for, and you want to look down at your wrist. And let's face it, you want to look down. You look at what you've got, and you go, you know what, I've worked really hard for that. And like we've already touched on, landmark achievements, and that's
it marks. Yeah, I completely agree, and I guess the space that you're in now, you're probably involved in quite a lot of landmark achievement conversations.
Yeah.
When somebody maybe explains to you
Some
why they're
wild
looking for a
ones.
particular
Some wild ones.
watch.
Like we had the lads. Pretty sure he said it was terminal, didn't he? He bought a watch and it was brain cancer.
Yeah.
No, it was definitely cancer. I think it was brain cancer. I'm very sorry if I've got this wrong.
I think you're right.
Yeah, but he told us it was terminal, and after some tough negotiations, we came to a deal. And afterwards, he was like, "Just want to say thank you for this because I've been diagnosed with this sort of terminal cancer, and one of the things I really want to do is buy watches that I like, whilst I can." And you guys are enabling me to do this. So, thank you.
It's crazy to be part of that, isn't it? And I guess people at different stages of their life
He's only
and
like
their cycle.
22, by the way, as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it was sad, and we went down to see him, and we handed the watch over because they're the sort of people that you want to get to know who are buying solely out of passion. They're buying solely out of passion for the watch. They're buying for something that they absolutely love. And we were in the area at the same time. So, well, you know what? We're actually traveling down. We've lived in London. Let's meet. Let's enjoy a drink together. Let's hand over the watch and let's meet you in person. He was a really nice lad.
Yeah.
But that is the beauty of it. When you meet somebody that is buying solely for passion and to celebrate something, that's the enjoyable sales, not just selling to someone who's going to put it away.
Yeah, of course. Does anything else stand out in terms of people that have maybe shared with you occasions that they're purchasing for? That
Matt the pilot.
Oh yeah, Matt the pilot.
Tell me about Matt the
mention
pilot.
us name dropping him. We won't say his last name.
He was a really sound guy. Yeah, Matt the pilot. He bought a couple of watches from us, and he still messages a lot now. There's another one that's came to mind now. You mentioned that, which I mentioned after. But Matt the pilot was. He reached out about a Universal Genève Paul Router that we had in stock. So the Paul Router, so again, sorry for boring your audience, but is one of the more collectible watches. Universal Genève doesn't really exist anymore, and it's one of these brands that are marvelled by watch collectors. And the Paul Router was designed as sort of one of the first ever watches. You fly over the North Pole, the Paul Router, and it was magnetic resistant because obviously, the North's quite magnetic. And he... Science, there you go, quick science. But yeah, he used to, I think he said that before Russia, and all that stuff without getting political. But he used to fly over the North Pole a lot. So he wanted to have the Paul Router as his watch. So he bought that from us, and he hadn't actually received the watch yet because he got it delivered to his cousin who lived here in the UK. And he actually got in touch again. He was like, well, on the pilot theme, big fan of the Breitling 809, the Scott Carpenter. So the first Swiss watch in space that was worn by Scott Carpenter. It was a Breitling Navitimer. And he was like, this guy's an inspiration. I'd really like to buy this watch as well. So we actually went down again. We went for dinner with him in London, actually was able to present him with both watches. And we had a wonderful evening with him. And he still messages now. He sends the occasional photo and he'll be like, it'll just be the Breitling or the Universal Genève hanging off some part of the cockpit in a plane, and he's 30,000 feet in the air, which is really cool. And then there was also the guy from Peru, Christian from Peru. That was insane. But he flew from Peru to the UK to collect an Omega Dark Side of the Moon, which was pretty incredible.
And we stayed up till like 3 a.m. to give it to him. His flight was delayed in a random hotel we weren't staying in.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was wild.
But I think because of the size of the spend and potentially the significance, you're more likely to have that level of connection with a customer.
Yeah.
Like him sending you the photo afterwards and wanting to stay in touch and be like, guys, just wore it doing this particular activity that I was telling you it was important to me. So there's a lot more to it than necessarily that initial transaction.
Yeah. There's nothing better than getting a customer wrist shot. When the customer's got the watch and they're out doing something and they send you a little wrist shot of what they're doing, wearing a watch that they've got from you, it's that's really cool. And like I say, watches are made for creating stories with, like we've already covered, landmark achievements, stories you want to make. And this is what vintage watches, in our opinion, is all about. They tell stories of, we sell a watch from the 60s that has been around the world and has told so many stories, and then it's going to carry on them stories. And you never know, that person might wear that watch getting married or at the birth of their child. And it's always going to mean something. And hopefully they go on to be family heirlooms. You know, we're not mistaken. Obviously, somebody might sell them on, but
Of course. Why do some watches appreciate more than others?
Scarcity, rarity, demand. I mean, you know, you look at the top 25 most expensive watches ever sold at auction, and the majority of them come with a certain story that makes them so valuable. Again, like Josh mentioned earlier on, the Paul Newman Daytona, that sold for over 17 million, the most recent one, because it was, if not the last Paul Newman Daytona he ever wore. It was engraved on the case back from his wife. It's got huge value to a collector. But scarcity and rarity, I mean, and you know, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this, but watches are icons, and that will obviously help with demand. And you cover that a lot in your videos.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we do a lot of stuff on Cartier at the moment. So Cartier is appreciating massively. I mean, it's a little bit of what's fashionable at the time. Like, it's swung back into fashion, but there's also a reason for that, and it's real pedigree and history. And it's something you can never take away from a brand. Like, you can never argue with the fact that, you know, they weren't the first pilot's watch. They weren't the first men's wristwatch, emphasis on men's, because everyone just comments when we say that, oh, well, Breguet made one for the Queen of Naples. But Cartier made one for Alberto Santos Dumont, a pioneer in the aviation industry. And he was one of the first sort of popular cases of a man strapping a wristwatch to his wrist. And, you know, little details like that, or the fact the Cartier tank was named after a Renault tank in World War I, and all this cool stuff, I think is really what, you know, keeps a watch timeless. Whereas a new brand like Brick Watch Company, Dave Portnoy, for example, you know, if I had to make a bet, I don't think it's going to last very long, because it's not got much heritage and much story, and they probably don't appreciate in value. I'll be honest, I've never looked. I could be completely wrong, but they probably don't appreciate in value. But, you know, you have to start to make the pedigree and history. So, you know, you can't discount them too much for that. But I think having a real good backstory, real good pedigree has a huge role in making a watch appreciate. Like, for example, everyone says Rolex is a hype watch, but they've been hyped for
such a long time.
Just look at the watch that's on your wrist. That's a Datejust. That's been around since 1945, and realistically, it has not changed during that time. And by obviously, you know, improved materials, improved movements, but the design of that watch is so iconic, it doesn't need to change. They got it perfect first time round.
That was the thing for me, and you used the T word there, Josh, timeless.
Yeah.
So I purchased this watch based on the fact that I could see myself wearing it in my 50s, in my 60s. Right, don't get me wrong, and this is an interesting comment. Once you buy one luxury watch, you become more interested in other ones, which is ridiculous. Equally, I haven't hedonically adapted to it just being my watch now. I'm still extremely grateful and pleased when I wear it.
Oh, it'll come soon.
In a far different way from like a car. So when I bought my new car, it was exciting, but I mean, I still like driving it, but it's not the same as my watch. I still get a buzz from wearing my watch.
Yeah, but a watch is on your wrist every day. It's in contact with your human body every day. And this is the part of the romanticism about it. You may have a beautiful Porsche 911, but, you know, it's not
maybe
on your,
one day,
it's not on your skin like 24/7. Like, am I right in saying that's the watch you wear for, you know, any time you're not in joggers and t-shirts?
Exactly.
Doing something serious.
So I'd say the majority of time then.
Yeah.
The majority of time you'll be wearing that Rolex Datejust, you know, whereas if you had a really nice Porsche, chances are you may drive it for an hour a day. If you drove it every day, unless you're doing long journeys, that's the intimate thing with watches. Yes. No matter what you're doing, they're strapped to your wrist. So no matter what experience you've had, whether it's good or bad, that watch has been there with you through it, and that's part of the romanticism.
Yeah, I can see the passion as well. I'm glad we brought up Rolex, because I am interested in. You said people claim it's a hype watch, and you disagree. You mentioned if Rolex decided to bring out 5 million watches tomorrow, it would impact it, but it probably wouldn't impact some of the older ones as much as anything that's coming out now.
Rolex isn't a hype brand. Rolex is realistically, you know, they wear the crown for a reason. I know that's such an old school saying, but they do wear a crown for a reason. And the coronet, if you want to call it a coronet. Wearing a crown for a reason sounds cooler, but it's the coronet if you want to be technical. But Rolex has the reputation, has been established with, world leaders. And I think we literally covered this in a video the other day on the Day Date. Everyone from the Dalai Lama to the President of the United States.
Lyndon B. Johnson,
Donald Trump, slightly more controversial, all have worn day dates and that sort of thing. So these watches are a staple of success, and they have been for, again, I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous to say it, but if you cast your mind back, let's say, was it 50 years ago now, 40, 50 years ago, and you look back to 80s culture, the sign of success on Wall Street was wearing a bicolor Datejust.
Can I make a point about this, though?
Yeah,
just for everyone at home. The man makes the watch doesn't make the man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there is a very strong correlation with the choice of a lot of people who have achieved something. Yeah. A lot of them choose Rolex. You don't have to choose Rolex. And there's obviously loads of the watches.
There's hundreds of the brands out there. I mean, we love Omega. We love Omega. We love Rolex. And then you can get onto Patek. Well, Patek's that next level up from Rolex, and you can get to AP and all them sort of things. But Rolex is realistically, as much as we may want to deny it, they are the number one brand for demand, hands down.
It's what you're asked for the most as well.
100%.
If you look at your size of your audience now on the different platforms, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, of course, are the main ones I would see you on. You have an audience that are going to be asking you for what they want you to source or what's coming next on the website. It's commonly Rolex.
Yeah. People will come to us all the time. I would like a Rolex Day-Date. I would like a Rolex Daytona. It is the most in-demand brand. Whether it's the best or not is open to discussion.
It's because it's front of mind.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it is front of mind. And I mean, they're great for getting eyes on a brand. I mean, we make a video on a Rolex, and obviously you're going to get people who don't even know watches.
Do you know what? I spoke to Josh about this. He mentioned that when the word Rolex or an image of a Rolex is used in a video, it will typically perform better, even if it's 100%. Of a similar standard of content to, say, if you used a Cartier watch.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because, like you just said, it appeals to people who maybe don't know about watches.
Yeah.
And if you do a video on a Vacheron Constantin, imagine, probably half the people listening to this, maybe more, don't know what Vacheron Constantin is, but I bet they know what Rolex is. Rolex is a household name. And that's just, again, a company with huge pedigree and history, great marketeers throwing their watches, swimmers, doctors, scientists, successful people. They're already manifesting this in their own brand by choosing to give these people watches, and naturally it's become what they planned. And whether you like it or not, a lot of people will associate that Rolex coronet with success.
Yeah,
literally. You look at every landmark achievement. I mean, I'm wearing a Rolex Explorer today. They were equipped on the first ever, the Himalaya, which is, I know we had a huge argument with somebody in the comments about that, but the first people to go to the top of Everest were equipped with Rolexes. With
other watches, shall we say, as a disclaimer. It wasn't just Rolex they had,
but it was part of the journey. It was part of the journey, and then it became associated with it.
And Rolex banged the drum on that,
which adds to the legacy.
Yeah, Rolex banged the drum on that, and the same with Formula One. The quickest people in the world, they wear Rolexes.
Well, I'm wearing a Sea Dweller today.
And you're wearing a Sea Dweller today.
Yeah. Luckily, James Cameron didn't go down in that submarine, but he did go down in a submarine. And, did a lot of things for filmmaking and scientific research as well. And that's part of their game as well, is sponsoring things like scientific research
and have links towards that as well. And you've spoken about this from a tax perspective as well, actually.
So they set up a foundation. They're a non-profit company, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which is crazy when you say that they're non-profit. I mean, there's multiple companies before it gets to the foundation that are a for-profit company, but like push comes to shove, like the end result is the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation takes most of it. And don't get me wrong, they do donate a lot of money to scientific research and saving underfunded projects and stuff. Like, am I right in saying it was Geneva Football Club they stopped from going under? The stadium, they revamped it with a bunch of money. I'm pretty sure I've done a video on this. Or it was a football club in Geneva or very close. Like, for example, they spent a lot of money on keeping that floating. But I personally don't think it's a dent in what they actually earn.
If you look at the revenues,
but you can't. That's the point. You can't look at the revenue, which is the clever thing.
You look back at the history of Rolex, and the movement producers that they used to use, they now own. The dial producers that they used to use, they now own. And only recently, with the acquisition of Bucherer, the largest watch retailer in Europe, they now own. So
talk to me about this move. This is a strategic move by Rolex.
Yeah.
To move into the retail sector.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting move from Rolex, but Bucherer are the largest watch retailer in mainly Central Europe and a huge Rolex authorized dealer. Rolex have come out with a statement and said that Bucherer doesn't have another generation to hand down. They don't have to hand the company down to, and Rolex have decided to acquire it for that reason. But it's interesting, Bucherer were the first ever watch retailer to go into the authorized pre-owned sector with Rolex. They basically now, and again, Josh covered this in a video recently, but they know all Bucherers don't just sell Rolex, they sell Omega, they sell Breitling. They now have insights into all of their major competitors, and the margins and the production values and the meetings that go on. It all gets reported back to Rolex. So it's caused a few stirs in the watch industry because, particularly large retailers here in the UK, like Watches of Switzerland Group, all of a sudden have had their nose slightly put out of joint that maybe another retailer is going to be favoured over them. But it's a very, very interesting move. And again, if you want to find out more, check out What's on Watches and watch Josh's video on the matter.
They're here in the podcast. We'll tell them that.
Yeah, your video was great because it basically explained that it also covers their almost weak points where if somebody can't purchase a Rolex, they might end up purchasing
100%.
an Omega or one of the other brands, and then of course they're actually getting the revenue from it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not as much as they sold on their own watches, but that's the name of the game. But one of the big points they've done it is for more control, in my opinion. Rolex has a notorious reputation for having terrible customer service, whether that's from the AD or the boutique. To be honest, the boutiques are less common complaint, but it still happens. The AD is the main one. Like, that's really popular. People going into a Rolex AD being laughed at, being messed around on waiting lists, I say with quotation marks, because there's an argument to whether they exist or not. I won't say any more on that matter. But if they actually own the people retailing their watches, because obviously a Rolex boutique and an AD is very different. For anyone who doesn't know, an AD is a retailer that's been chosen to officially represent and sell Rolex watches, whereas a boutique is Rolex basically directly selling them. So if they control a retailer that's a Rolex AD, they have the final say in how the operation's done. They can keep very close tabs on it. And I think that's a huge thing for them because that's a major issue for them at the moment as a company, as a brand as a whole.
It supports them because, like you say, the brand's so strong in so many areas. If they're falling down the customer service area, if they can have a tighter oversight of that, then it's going to just continue to support them.
For sure.
It also it completely concretes their position as being the main brand in Central Europe. A huge part, particularly again here in the UK, there's a huge amount of politics when it comes to watch brands. If you see a jeweller's opening up and they have Rolex, Omega and other brands in there, there'll be fights over space. Well, if Rolex has got X amount of space, Omega needs this amount of space and all this sort of stuff. Whereas now, as they own Bucherer and they control most of Central Europe, no, Rolex has this amount of space. And if you want to be here, this is what you get. And they've now just concreted their position in that area as being the number one brand, unrivaled.
As watch dealers, I want to ask you about fake watches.
I seen one straight away when we came into Glasgow today. Straight away.
You parked up?
We parked up. We went to the hotel. We had a shower. We thought we'd get nicely socially lubricated with a couple pints before we came here. A couple of pinties.
I was going to say a few little pinties.
And straight away in the bar we'd chosen, Lucky Bar, there was a guy playing on the fruit machine with a fake solid gold GMT. And the best thing the best game ever is to go fake watch over there, and analyze it.
Obviously, we don't want to get our head caved in, so we didn't say it too loudly.
No, you got to do it behind their back like a true gent.
But you can spot them quite quickly.
Yeah, very quickly.
Fake watches is a huge fear for the watch industry. The surge of watches and the quality. I know that fake watches are never going to be as good as the real thing, but fake watches are coming from manufacturers and they are super clones, if you wish to call them that. But I've actually got a photo which I didn't send you, but I can actually send you to you after. But there is obvious tells. When you really come down to it, there is obvious tells. Often copied. What is the saying? You say this to me often.
Swiss manufacturing can be copied but never replicated.
That's exactly what I was trying to say.
Very close to the saying, if it's right.
And if you compare a fake movement, for example, because they make clone movements now, but if you compare a fake movement to a real movement, there are tells in terms of the finishing, the engraving, certain components that are used. But again, this is why I'm saying to people, if you do want to go into this field, you've so got to know what you're looking at, because to the untrained eye, you could take a case back off a watch and that looks like that says Rolex on the movement, that must be genuine. And you can get really easily stung. So you've got to work with professionals to be able to do that. And that's why every watch that we offer, obviously, when we receive the watch in, it's authenticated, it's given to our watchmaker. He takes the watch apart, he authenticates every component, because you've got to be really careful. You've got to be really careful.
Brings up an interesting topic, Tom.
Yeah.
Box and Papers does not authenticate a watch.
100%.
You authenticate a watch by taking it to bits and scrutinising every piece.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the questions you get asked the most. Does this watch have box and papers? And
yes, that's one part of it.
Yeah.
But it's not.
No, it's not the be all end all. It's a lot of the time I ask people, why does that matter?
Yeah.
And they go, it's just my personal preference. And I'll say, if you don't mind me asking, why is that your personal preference? And they can't give me an answer. They just say, I just want box and papers. Someone's probably told them you should only buy a watch with box and papers. It's nice to have. And if you are looking at it from the price perspective, it can help from a couple of £100 to maybe £1,000, depending on the watch, and maybe a lot more depending on special watches. But never let a deal depend on it, because you may never get the opportunity to buy that watch again, which is the thing. And at the end of the day, you can't wear a box and papers.
No. And
as watch dealers, I can tell you for a fact, when it comes to us buying watches for us personally, couldn't care less about box and papers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's I think with modern watches, particularly over the last 20 years, obviously box and papers has become a surge of, it must have box and papers, it must be a full set. But you look back at watches from we was talking about this the other day, 70s and 80s. Rolex used to put little cards in their day boxes and say, use me as an ashtray, use me as a cigar holder, use me to hold your cigarettes. The box had no significant value whatsoever.
That's why they were made of plywood.
Yeah. They're not
made to be thrown away. It was packaging. Once the warranty was up, you throw it away.
This is really interesting for me, because I really liked opening the green box.
Yeah.
Unpackaging it.
Yeah.
I think mine's Hong Kong and my brother's is maybe France or something like that. But it's really nice to read that and be this
cool.
is where it's been. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because they are mine's 97 and what was he, 95 maybe?
Do you know what?
Something like that.
I'll be honest. You sell that many watches? I'm joking. Honestly, mate, it's been far too long.
But very, very, very cool to see that. So I can understand why people ask for that. And I think, with my personality type as well, and my relatively low level of knowledge in the space beyond what I thought looked nice and what I thought was classic and timeless and good value, the box and papers would have been important for me if I was asking for it.
What I was about to say there is, if I asked that question, why are you looking for box and papers? If someone just simply turned around and said, I just want to know where it's from because I think it's cool, I'd be like, fair enough. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
There's more to that than I don't trust you. Yeah, I get that.
I mean, we had that date just that had we had a tapestry dial date just, again, not particularly rare, but the dial had patinaed and it had started to show a really a unique, where the UV rays had been spent on the watch for so long that it started to go. And you have a look at the papers and you go, why has that happened? And it was bought in Hawaii. And you're like, okay, cool. So you can understand it's lived in Hawaii for X amount of years and it's been under the Hawaiian sun. That's quite cool. And it adds to that value. It
adds to the story.
Adds to the story. And that's what it's about. But if somebody comes to you and they offer you a one-of-one watch, that the only one ever known, and you turn around to them and go, but does it have the box and papers? You're going to sound like a bit of a Charlie.
So it's more about somebody then deconstructing it, having a look at the different mechanisms and parts.
Well, the most expensive Rolex ever sold at auction was the Paul Newman Daytona for over 17 million. And I know obviously people know where that came from, but it didn't have box and papers.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah. And I'm just looking down here at the moment, but other Rolexes sold at auction, the other one of the Paul Newman Daytonas doesn't have box and papers. It's the rarity, it's the watch itself that you're buying, not the piece of paper that it comes with.
Yeah, it's interesting. You guys have been talking about more affordable vintage watches, perhaps for people that are at the start of that journey, or fiscally they don't want to maybe go to the £5,000.
There's an important aspect with Swiss watches, Carl, and some German watch brands as well. A lot of luxury watches, basically. I don't know why I secluded it to Swiss watches, but really well-made watches. And that when people are spending a lot of money on something that your phone can do, a digital Casio can do, when people are spending that much money on a watch, they're not just buying a watch, but they're seeing like it's very romantic in the sense that they see a version of themselves with this watch. And it's not the answer to everything, but they definitely picture themselves with this watch and like, yeah, I'll get this watch and it'll be an accomplishment. And, you know, I can move on from that point with this watch and I've done something great and I've achieved this goal. And that's what's brilliant about watches, I think. That's the difference between, say, a Casio, which is great, versus an Omega or a Rolex or a Tudor.
Because there's a little bit more to it.
Yeah,
I can see that.
And you touched on us, we sell watches starting from anywhere from, I think the cheapest watch we've sold is about £900 and we've sold, I think, just shy of 20. But the reason why, like, for example, the Muster Cartiers that we offer are all mainly, before I say that, because we have actually just sold one recently, it was new old stock for 2.5. But they're all sub £2,000. But that's because enjoying a high quality watch doesn't mean you have to pay a ludicrously high price tag. You don't have to do that. You know, it's available at every price point. And getting into vintage watches, I know we've said that to get the ultra rare stuff, of course it takes capital because it's ultra rare. But if you want to go out and buy one of my favourite watches we've got in at the moment is that Omega Jumbo 36mm steel case, manual wind. There is, honestly, every time I get it out and you wind it and
it's
you...
because he's sad, Cole.
I literally sit there and I listen to, because, you know, how I get my thrills, you know, a dull men's club.
Yeah.
But when you wind that watch and you hear the wind going on it, and that watch is...
That's where your appreciation comes from.
It's less than £1,500.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So £1,500 would be maybe like, is around that kind of figure where somebody's maybe having an entry level to it.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the ones that are in the category that, if somebody's got a real appreciation for luxury vintage watches, that might be what they might need in terms of capital to make the first step in the rung.
Do you know what's interesting about this? We actually had a conversation about this in the car on the way up here. We get more excited when someone buys a really nice watch that we're really passionate about for £1,500 that we found and gone, do you know what? This is bloody brilliant. This is a fantastic watch, and it's 1.5K or 1K or maybe 2K. Which is still relatively cheap in the watch game as a whole, then if we sell a 15 grand date or, you know, a Submariner, which is not a lot of money in the watch world. Again, we're not showing off. I'm just saying, like, these are the price ranges we tend to work in. We get more excited when someone buys a beautiful Constellation that we found for £1.5 or £2,000 versus, you know, a 15 grand date or £11,000 Submariner, or you know.
One of the favourite watches that I remember when we both got it into stock, we went, I could own that, was that Tropical Dial Omega.
Yeah,
it was £1,300, and it went to a guy. It sold very quickly, and it went to a guy that he collected 40s, 50s Omegas, and the dial had gone this completely unique, I want to call it a yellowy, orangey colour due to the radium and the UV rays, and it was so one of a kind. I was like, that's incredible. You're never going to see that again. And
it's one of our cheapest watches we've sold.
Yeah, and it went to a good home, and we loved that watch. And it's not about the money; it's about the beauty of the watch itself. The money's just an extra with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a guarantee of quality either.
No.
Introducing Hublot.
Well, but like a funny.
So interestingly, for watches like that, by you being critical of that particular brand, Hublot, is that controversial in the space?
Oh yeah.
What, to be critical of Hublot?
No, Hublot is controversial.
The brand itself is. Okay.
I thought you meant to be critical of it. I was like, I don't know. But Hublot...
Hamilton. Yeah, same movements.
Yeah, okay. So when you look at like the classic fusions and things like that go into a Hublot, you can pick up the same movement in a watch that's less than £500. But you pay through the nose for it because it says Hublot on it. And I know we'll always get people...
But they do colour the ceramic in a really cool way, Tom. I was talking to
a friend of mine, shout out Frank, and he was trying to tell me I you know what? And this is
fair play to him. That is his job.
That is his job. And you know what? This is funny because I disregard Hublot a lot of the time, and I know that the classic fusions use off-the-shelf ETA movements. We've never sold a Hublot. Sorry. And you know what?
We never will.
We're not passionate about it, so we won't sell it, and that's something we're built on. He was telling me the other day. He was like, "Oh, did you know the Spirit of Big Bang uses the Zenith Alpamero movement?" And I went, funnily enough, you know what, I didn't. And he was like, oh, I've told you something you didn't know. He couldn't believe it. And I was like, that's great. I was like, so they use the El Primero movement. I was like, it's amazing what Hublot can do with a piece of history and how quickly they can ruin it. Because they've taken the El Primero movement, which is probably one of the best movements ever made, and they've made it look horrendous.
You've done a video on that. If you
on the Spirit of Big Bang having an El Primero movement?
No, just the El Primero movement in general.
Oh yeah, El Primero movement's incredible.
Your appreciation for it. So that's where I think, and I was really keen to ask you this about your content. That's maybe less likely to go viral, but it's more likely more likely to reach the people that really resonate with what you're interested in.
It's niche.
Because this is an interesting thing. So by the time this comes out, it might well be out there. I've built a podcast course for people to start and launch their own podcast and be successful at it.
Pretty niche in the broad scheme of things.
Pretty niche, yeah.
Congrats.
But the people it reaches, Carl,
will be interested because because most podcasts fail. Either episode 8 or episode 24. Almost all of them. Hundreds of thousands every year fail. They fall away. And that's because it's a hard game and there's lots of processing systems in place. But also I said in that course, not only is the doing a podcast course niche, but building a podcast, you're actually better off to be niche in your topics you cover. Yeah. And me not being super niche on the topics I cover has potentially limited me having a real, like, really tight following. Whereas I've got a pretty committed audience of several thousand people who really back me. But if I'd gone right into business or right into fitness or right into mindset or right into sales, I would have built an audience faster than I have over the 3 years.
Quality over quantity.
Yes, but it's the same for what you guys are doing when sometimes you produce a piece of content that's slightly more in there about a watch movement or the craftsmanship.
In typical corporate fashion, it's all about finding that balance. You'll notice we tend to, if we do like 3 videos on, and this goes for any content sort of creator, to be honest, or anyone in a business, if you're doing if you're doing 3 really nerdy videos on watches, it's probably good to offset that with your next video being maybe for us, it'd be watch pop culture. Maybe someone's released something and it's controversial, or maybe there's a new release from Rolex, which is always controversial because they barely do anything new. That kind of thing. And you'll notice that pattern, actually, if anyone is ever sad enough to have a look through.
Yeah. There's got to be a strategy to it, though.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Josh will turn to me and he's like, okay, so... because we have the stuff that's focused on the stock, and that stuff is naturally going to be more focused at sales.
Yeah. But no one wants to be sold to.
No, exactly, and that's what Josh says to me. He's like, no one wants to be sold to. So you know what? Last week, prime example, Swatch Group released the Swatch X Black Pan Scuba 50 Fathoms. Whatever your opinions are on that is a topic for another day. But that's a hugely, like Josh said, a pop culture topic. So we sat down and I did a video and Josh did a video and we talked about that watch, and then it's been followed up with watches that we've got in stock because you get that surge of the audience and it's a pop culture topic, and I always
giving away our secrets there to your valued listeners.
No, but
I always blow wind up his ass, but he is good at seeing that. He's good at recognizing them patterns, and that's why he's good at what he does.
Gary Vaynerchuk says jab jab right hook.
Yeah, what a legend, by the way.
And Josh, having created content from such a young age, will have been aware of that.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? One of your guests, actually, it was like one of the guys who really turned me on to making content and putting value into content. And that was Chris Reeves.
Ah, Chris Reeves. Yeah. Great guy. Chris runs the Talk Norwich City football podcast and runs social media for a lot of different businesses as a consultant as well. And he was one of the early guests in the show. I'd known him for a good few years before that, and he spoke around every piece of content you create should either achieve one of like a number of things, either educate, inspire, humor, entertain, or like whatever your goal is. Maybe it sells or it generates inquiry or whatever. But so many people just like don't have any form of like, what does it like watch back your video dispassionately. What did it do to what did it make my audience feel? What did it make them do? And if you can't really pinpoint it, you're kind of like, why did I bother?
Yeah. And do you know what's interesting about the Chris Reeves thing? Like when I heard that podcast and I heard that advice, like we had a very small following, and like in the grand scheme of things, we are still a small following, but when I heard that podcast, we've increased 33 times X on Instagram, more on TikTok, a bit less on YouTube, but we have increased. And just following that very simple bit of advice, and if you are really self-critical on whatever video you're making or piece of content you're making for social media, you've got to think like, what's someone going to get out of this from watching it? And that's like the biggest tip ever, is like give someone a reason to watch. Like you just saying, oh, you know, look how class my day was. They don't get anything from that. But like saying how you get to a point where your day is that class, that's all the difference.
Is much better. Yeah. It's mad, and that's amazing. That podcast came out in like April 2020, but that's the nature of long form content, that like if you really engage with that hour or hour and a half, hour long the show was, and you find one thing, you're still talking about it years later, and you're like, you know what, it was pretty instrumental for me.
Yeah, huge, really huge.
Yeah, it's exciting.
So shout out Chris Reeves.
Yeah, amazing. And do you know what, Josh, like I can't remember what anniversary it would have been for the podcast, but you left a comment on like LinkedIn when it was maybe the second anniversary of the pod, or third anniversary of the pod, and probably the third anniversary, I would say, because it's probably more recently with what's happened with you. And you were talking about how helpful it's been from a mindset shift perspective.
Oh yeah,
and I was
huge.
And I was
You caught me in a rut with this podcast, by the way. You caught me in a real rut.
So like I say, I met Josh years ago, knew he was extremely capable because of our mutual friend Bryce, who will do a round two on this once everything's allowed to happen. We won't expand on that. For
little insight on our Instagram page.
There's a little insight on your Instagram page and your TikTok as well, which I thought you did that really tastefully as well, which is great. So we won't give any more away because we can't speak about that. But through your friendship with Bryce, you went into the Navy, and because you were talking about, you were texting when he was on the ship. It's interesting though, because it seemed like a relatively good path because of the benefits he got from it.
Yeah. But, you know...
Thanks, Josh. Thank you for doing it. Yeah,
it is. But he didn't get the same things I got from it. Basically, there's two types of people. There's the people that do very well from the military, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some people do extremely well, like better than you can ever imagine. And they have a great life, and they do loads of cool stuff, and it's class. And then there's the people like me who just, you know, they can go for a long run. You know, they can do their job to a decent level, but at the end of the day, it's just not for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And some people just don't like it. I wouldn't say I was bad at my job, but I wouldn't say I was very good. And that was probably because I didn't really care about it when I got there. And that's just the way it goes. And no one has any hard feelings about it. But, you know, I think Bryce got a little bit more from me. But, you know, the classics, perseverance, you know, knowing what to do when something goes wrong, you know, looking after yourself, all that came from it. The classic ones you hear on every podcast is pretty boring in my opinion.
I've had a lot of military guests, and I try and get beyond the initial lessons immediately because there's always something deeper.
Yeah. I found out I don't like people call.
Interesting.
That's what I learned. When you're
spending time with people.
Yeah, like 200 blokes just stuck in a tin can during COVID. It's never going to end well, is it? You end up falling out with a lot of people. Out of 200 people, I'd say like 2 or 3 of them are like my close friends. So it's not a great ratio, but you know, don't knock it. Go try it if you're interested in it. You know, I'm not saying it's terrible. It was just terrible for me. That was it.
But it hit you at a time when you were in a rut.
The podcast hit me when I was in a rut. Like I knew I was leaving the Navy. I didn't really know what to do. This was on the cards, you know, and it's all good and well saying, yeah, we'll do this thing. Like, but when it comes to actually action in it and actually following through, and like hearing the Chris Reeves podcast, for example, was a really, really good one.
Amazing.
And do you know what? Maybe we wouldn't have been as successful if I didn't listen to that podcast. Both episodes, by the way. Like,
he was on a second time. Yeah, right. So,
but even with things like when he talks about, you know, people giving you shit on the internet, like we've both had our fair share of shit on the internet.
Just on that, I mentioned Chris is the host of the Talk Norwich City podcast. Football is the most toxic area of Twitter.
Yeah,
I would say so. Maybe somebody will tell me otherwise in the comments or over DM. But people are angry either with the other team, and you support them, or they're angry with your team and everyone's getting it.
Well, you're Team Rolex, I'm Team Omega. Well, you're going to be angry if I say, you know, Omega is class.
Yeah, exactly. So your videos, people get riled up.
I'm not saying it's as bad as football. I believe football is the worst.
Yeah,
I do believe
that. Chris spoke about trolling, and he gets it really bad. His mum passed away when he was really young, and people genuinely bring that up to him.
Yeah.
But he has this most like
I'm sorry you feel that way.
Stoic. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
so like he'll message them, and more often than not, and Chris is now on the BBC Norwich channel, and he's doing brilliant for himself. I'm delighted for the guy. And he was talking about this because he had to shift because the volume of hate was so high. If you lowered yourself to it, you're going to end up in bother. And I actually shared a quote the other day when my TikTok comments went mental. If you roll around in the mud, the pigs like it.
Yeah.
And it's so true. Now, sometimes I've gone back and correct them and stuff like that.
I don't know. We roll around in the mud quite a lot.
You do like it for the engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the engagement, for the ego, mate. For the ego.
Because you think you're right.
Yeah.
You know you're right, sorry.
But everyone's no. Not always, mate. Not always. Like, everyone's opinions are valid, and there a lot of topics in watches are very ambiguous.
Subjective, yeah, they are, aren't they? It's a lot of opinion.
It's a very personal possession, a watch, and if you, like you said earlier on, if you share an opinion, I mean, again, it's funny I'm wearing the Explorer because we put out that Explorer video recently.
Yeah, everyone either hates you or the Explorer.
Yeah,
and from the comments, it was hard to tell.
Yeah. People were either angry with my opinion on the Explorer or angry with me because I said it was the perfect everyday watch. And all I'm doing is saying, I quite like this watch, wearing it for every day. And everyone's like, oh, no, you can't do that.
Just wear a sub.
Just wear a sub. Buy a Tudor because I bought a Tudor.
Do you own a sub? No.
Yeah, and that's the irony of it all, realistically, is it's like, prime example, last night, and shout out if the guy's listening, I highly doubt he is. Why would you buy a Cartier tank when you could buy a Seiko tank? Oh, because it's a different kind of watch, there's different heritage. Yeah, but if you want the tank look, just buy a Seiko tank. I'm like, you own a Seiko tank, don't you?
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
You're a Seiko tank fan.
You've got skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And people want to make sure that their own purchase
is justified.
Is justified because they hate to look down at your wrist and go, "Oh, why did I buy that?"
It's like the tall poppy syndrome, the crabs in a bucket. People want to justify their own actions.
Yeah,
like maybe if they feel like they've made a mistake, they'll maybe call people out on the other choice. I'm like, no, you should have done this. And that's all they're doing is they're stroking their own ego, really.
It's the same with everything that you do in life.
Yeah, we've all been guilty of it.
Yeah.
We've all been guilty of it.
But it's
it's recognising that there wasn't.
Yeah.
When you quit your job,
yeah.
And after you came to the Navy and decided to go full time with this, and people questioned your decision on that.
Oh, my whole family questioned the decision on that call.
Yeah.
I had my whole family slagging me off in a pub about doing What's on Watches, saying it wasn't going to be successful. And like the same family members are now getting a Rolex for Christmas.
It's the nature of the game, though, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
Do you know the guy that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, Darren Lee? He's an Irish guy. He's been on my show a couple of times, and he's done fantastic with his show Kickoff Sessions. And he always tells this story. And we both interviewed Rob Lipsett on our podcast.
Oh, what a guy! But I've followed Rob Lipsett for years.
Yeah, so amazing to like the nature of the podcast. Getting to interview him is like crazy. And Rob was telling a story, and he's told it both to Darren and I. And Darren always brings it up. When he was first creating like fitness content in Ireland, loads of people were like, "Oh, what does Billy Big Biceps think he's doing? You'll be back working in Hollister in no time," because that's what he quit and moved away from. And there was somebody in particular that said something like, "You're a joke. Like, what are you doing taking your top off? All this stuff." And the next message he got was like 8 or 9 months later, and it was like, "Oh, my cousin's opening a cafe in whatever part of Ireland it was, Dublin for argument's sake. Would you mind giving it a shout out?"
I know this story.
And it is so funny because it's very much that first they laugh, belittle, or try and tear you down, and then they want help.
Well,
is
it Chris Reeves that said first they ask like why, then they ask how?
Probably we discussed that, I would guess so, because it's a great
people be like, why are you doing that? And then they'd be like, oh, how did you do that?
Yeah.
When you prove yourself.
We have a lot of that.
Yeah.
People, I mean, like I said, when you quit your job, but walking away from a job in the watch industry to go and start secondhand dealing, people were like, what on earth are you doing?
It's not as common as you would expect it to be.
It's not as common, no, and people are like, oh, it's just, it's going to be another, backstreet jeweler flipping the odd old watch and that sort of thing. And, listen, we are not the biggest fish in the game, but
you've started to build a sustainable model.
We built a sustainable model, and a lot of the people, and I'm not going to disrespect with names, but people that did question it. Why on earth would you quit your job that's secure in the watch industry, something that you love, to go and do this? Have come on and said, I don't know how you've done it, but well done. And it's and that is,
there's a little period in between where you just need to do the work.
Yeah. And that's the most motivating thing. There's nothing more motivating than like hearing, friends or family saying, I think it's a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing this. And then lo and behold, like nothing's going to get you more fired up than that. And, I'm not saying we are not an overnight success.
No,
and
definitely
we have
not.
not solidified this to a point where we can do this for years and years. There's still a lot of work to go.
And there's probably little areas you want to pivot to as well, which I want to ask about in a
But
second.
like for the time frame we've done okay. So, but it's not the be all end all yet. But so far we've proved, I'd say 99% of people wrong, 100%.
And that feels good.
That's a great feeling.
1% to go.
1% to go, yeah. That's people who said we can't be millionaires. We'll get there. Give it 10 years, 15 years, 30 years.
The nature of the watch dealer game is you're not only as good as your last sale, but you need to have a good pipeline of what's coming, and your content, I guess, plays a big role in that. For people with like online businesses that are thinking about this kind of thing, what percentage of time, resource, and thought is going towards building that versus building the watches that you're gonna?
Well, one thing we said was like, before you get overheads, and this goes to anyone like starting a business, from my opinion, before you have overheads like wages to pay and maybe a physical accommodation, you'd maybe argue that the social media is more important than actually selling your product, to get the reputations, get your name out there. Because like, if you've not got overheads, you probably work a part-time job. And that means if you don't sell anything, that's all right. You just carry on cracking on with your ideas until you find something that works and gets your name out there. But as soon as you get like serious overheads, you know, selling the product becomes important, because you need to pay for that. So, you know, that's one part of it. Like the social media is so vital until that point. Yeah.
Of course.
Because, and I think that, again, going back to the beauty of the dynamic, is obviously Josh went full-time What's on Watches
before you, which is worth noting.
Yeah. So
it's because we recognised that factor though. Like, we had a website to pay for and watches to pay for, and that was it really, wasn't it?
And we needed to be able to build the name. You've got to build a brand. People need to know who they're buying from. You know, it's very easy to go and buy a watch online, but, you know, it's very scary to hand over, let's say, £5,000 to somebody you don't know if they've got any backing, anything like that. And, and I know it's an old school logic, but there's safety in numbers. The more you are recognised as a brand and the more you're recognised as a reputable place to buy watches, the more likely you need to see sales. But we were getting to a point where we were building the socials. Josh was working on it every day. I was working and then still selling watches at the same time. And I was trying to balance both. But the socials were still growing. The inquiries were still growing because the socials is growing. Then it got to a point where it's like, okay, right, we now need to be able to back this with the sales and the business side of it. And that's when it was time for me to take the plunge.
To do that and feel, it's interesting because a lot of times, sometimes social media can be like a form of like mental masturbation. Whereas for you guys, it is actually
this tool
per 1,000 followers, there's genuine inquiry.
I always say it's a shop front. Like if you're an online business, it's a shop front.
100%.
Like I don't understand online businesses. Like a lot of people, like accountants, for example, that say they're a new age accountant and like all they do is post photos on social media. Like you're getting nothing from that. If you're going to focus mainly online, if you had a shop but you had it in a location where people weren't walking past it, you'd go, this is a rubbish place for a shop, right? So why have a social media page and do things that's only going to get you maybe 3 people viewing it or 10 people viewing it? You want to do the things that gets people looking at it, i.e. the equivalent of buying a shop in London where thousands of people are going to walk past it. So you want to do the stuff online where thousands of people are going to walk past it and see it. Yeah. And that's primarily how you grow.
Treating it.
Do what works.
And that was the most important thing, realistically, right back at the very start of this. And that is, half the reason why Josh came on and why we have seen the success is because I wasn't going to go and open a shop and put loads of watches in a window and then hope for the best. And I wasn't going to make a website and put loads of watches on a website and just hope by chance that my website pops up and Googled it, because that's impossible. So how do you get people to look at it? Because we aren't, no offense, but we aren't reinventing the wheel. There's other people that sell watches and there's lots of very good people out there that sell watches.
Better than us.
Better than us,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm joking. But there is
good at what they do, but maybe they aren't driving the same level of inquiry because you guys have really dedicated yourself to the funnel.
And you've got
maybe.
Maybe. But you've got to have that. You've got to have that shop front. So having a sort of strong social media presence is part of the key. And even though I was terrible at social media, and that's why Josh is really good at it, because as we said in that how to become a watch trader, either get good or find someone good, which is the key thing. I wasn't going to dedicate time into learning how to edit videos and try and be charming on camera, and that's where he comes in, and it's a nice mix.
What's going to allow you to keep scaling? Because growing social media is one obvious answer, but what else is front of mind for you two?
Shop eventually, isn't it?
We will have a physical location eventually, and the reason why having and I know that may surprise people when it comes to building an online business, but at the end of the day, if you're parting, and I'm not saying we may have a shop front or we may have a lounge, but if somebody is parting with 25, 30, 50, 100, if you ever get to that level, £1 million, they want to know who they're buying it from. They don't just want to pay on a website link and then hopefully it gets there by the post. They want to sit down. You want to have that client experience. We still do that now. We still meet with If we can, we take clients for cigars, we take clients for drinks, and some people call us pretentious for doing so. But at the end of the day, if somebody's buying a watch from us and that's the experience they want, then who are we to decline that? So having a location will be beneficial for that, because it's that next level of, can I come and see the watch? Of course. Let's make an appointment.
I think that's why online business in the watch space differs from online business in
you need both.
Maybe 90% of others that we could name.
But right now, we've got a really good thing with just being online and still meeting clients in public if required. But shop eventually, or
that's one.
Lounge.
What's next?
Scaling up the social media. So we're talking bigger and better things.
YouTube is a key priority.
The series you're doing, which is longer form, a moment of your time, are interviews with other people in the watch industry or people with interesting watch collections. Is that how I would describe
that's
it?
Correct, yeah.
You may be on there yourself someday.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Well, if you keep giving me the bug to buy more of them, then it's potential. Yeah.
Send Cullum one every single day, every reel.
One idea we've got is to take like 5 iconic Rolexes and review them, but in the environment they were designed for. So review one underwater in scuba gear, scuba diving. Review one in an airplane while someone's doing acrobatics and you're strapped to the wing walking. That kind of thing. Like review one in the Arctic. Review one on an expedition up a mountain somewhere. Like
that's where your creativity comes in, and then it's a nice goal to work towards as well. But I can see where the content's going, and like I say, I think for an audience of your size, you're still creating content that's outside of that reach. I firmly believe the podcast is unsubscribed. I think I have better episodes than the number of people that listen to them and the number of people that subscribe, and I just need to keep going and building, and it'll be worthwhile.
Another area for growth for us is venturing probably further into the higher value pieces and building that network of high value clients, because we have a passion, we have a passion for watches, and vintage watches, but as we've already touched on, they're expensive, and we do want to grow the business to a point where we can really start offering the ultra rare, 1 of 5 dates ever produced, a bloodstone dial, that sort of thing. So on a personal level, that is something I would really like to start venturing into, and one, to feed my passion, but that's the thing. The one thing we've always said since the start, Josh and I, is that we only offer things that we love.
So important.
It's so. I mean, don't get me wrong. We sell watches that we don't necessarily fall in love with. Like, say, if a customer comes to me and goes, "I want a 47mm Breitling, and I would want to pay this for it," it'd be very bad business people. Oh no, that's not for us. Well, of course, we will find you that watch. But when we actually sit down,
by the way, doesn't mean Breitling's a bad watch manufacturer. No. Just a lot.
You don't like that particular watch.
I don't like the big ones, basically.
Yeah,
the
it's not our
Carpenters
taste.
And things like that. Very cool. But we'll source you anything. But the stuff, what you're getting at is the stuff we've bought with our own money and put on our website is stuff we really love and believe in.
Yes.
And that's how we can be passionate about it when talking to clients, when producing content, is because we love that particular product.
And your money's where your mouth is as well.
Yeah, and your money's where your mouth is. That's our stock, and you know what? If it doesn't sell, then sod it, we'll enjoy it.
We'll wear the hell out of that.
Great point.
Yeah, and we've got no issue with that. But yeah, moving into the higher value, finally setting up a physical location, growing the YouTube channel. We want to sit down with more people and talk about watches. We want to be able to review, we were brainstorming that idea the other day, and it was epic. Imagine being able to review, oh, by the way, this is a Rolex Sea Dweller, and we're diving in the Great Barrier Reef.
Steve Backshall style.
Yeah. Reviewing watches in their natural element.
Yeah.
Don't ask us to review a spaced one.
By the way, that's
That might get a little bit
patented. If anyone
yeah, you're going to
copies
say
that.
we may have just revealed.
Yeah.
My
Or if,
girlfriend is a lawyer.
or if anyone wants to help fund that.
Oh, if anyone wants to help fund that,
Yeah.
get in touch at info@whatsonwatches.
But that is, and that is, and I don't mind being honest with your audience and things like that. Is of course the socials have grown so much, but realistically, we are nowhere near on a percentage scale the biggest watch dealers. Not even in the UK, not even in England, not even in Scotland. You're nowhere near.
Yeah, I think people get lost in the numbers of the sale.
Yeah, and people think that
We're talking about margins, aren't we? Because you're paying a good price to buy one.
People will often comment on our post, being like, "Oh, like because we're young," they'll say, "Daddy's money," or they'll be like, "By the way, his dad ain't there anymore. My dad ain't rich." So
thanks for just telling the audience that.
Yeah, well,
we haven't revealed that on camera anymore. But there, thanks for that.
it's fine, but like,
Yeah, but that's the nature.
but that's
yeah.
that people need to hear that really, because like
it's
if
true,
they're commenting stuff like that, like
And it's like what you said about your guy from Norwich. You're like, oh, you're just playing with your dad's money. I'm like, wish I was. You know what I mean? If it would be very, very, very
That's
easy.
the nature of the
or like
trolls.
people like nepo babies. People are like, oh, you've obviously got connections. Got
And
no connections. We grew up in like Selby, which is just. I mean,
a
it's not a
miners
place.
town in the north of England.
Yeah, it's not a place where like
There's loads of Welsh dealers that you can get networked
exactly.
with. Or
It's
loads
not like
of
we
people that
grew
have
up in
connections.
Mayfair, London.
Yeah, and
It's not like our mum and dads were like celebrities. We're just very normal northern.
And we don't.
people.
We've covered this before as well, but actually starting this was huge sacrifice because
massive.
it was we didn't have an investor. We risked our own capital. We put our own money
We all
in.
pulled together.
Everyone pulled together. I sold watches that I loved to be able to
In order to
start this.
finance, yeah.
And
Cut my investment portfolio.
you cut your investment portfolio. So we had to pull together, and we started with 3 watches that we own. We started with 3 watches that we bought and made minimal margins just to start this going. Whereas some people
Get the
come in,
testimonial, promote
Yeah.
it.
and
Yeah.
some people come into this and they have £1 million behind them to go out and buy whatever they want, and all of a sudden they can
So they're a watch dealer.
say they're a watch dealer. And again, we're not disrespecting anybody in the field because there is some terrific watch dealers
And if
out
we
there.
could have done that, we would. Let's
Yeah,
not lie.
100%. If we had £1 million at our disposal, we'd be selling watches
Yeah.
in Dubai right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're not. We have to slog for a sale. We have to work really hard for it. When it's still a risk, and it's our own money at risk, and we aren't millionaires, and we're not nepo babies.
And
We're
we're a long way off being millionaire.
Yeah, but the work's going in, and I'm extremely excited to see where it's got to already. And it's happened fast in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, 100%.
If we look at it. And I said at the very start when we started recording, I knew we were always going to have this conversation. 1, because of my connections to Josh. 2, because I've actually bought a watch from you. And I'm also interested in the subject. And I think people who listen are interested in the watch industry, purchasing it, and the growth of online business is a theme that's been in a lot of my podcasts. But the speed that it came around, because you guys were hitting some of these milestones, and I knew it'd be a good time to speak about them as well. Both going full time, both having that level of like passion and excitement at this moment in time. It came around fast if you look at the timeline.
Listen, it has been an incredible journey so far, and we feel very, very honoured to be able to do that. It's been a lot of hard work. There's been a lot of sacrifice. There's been a lot of late nights.
A lot of arguments.
Yeah, there's it's not smooth sailing. There is ups, there is downs, there is highs, there is lows, but there's great reward with what we do. And it's funny when we get these little achievements, and we sometimes sit there and go,
Yeah, we
hell.
said to you in the car today, like, hang on a minute, our day at work today is we're going to drive to Glasgow and we're going to film a podcast. And that's what we're being paid to do today. Not paid by you. Obviously, we're paying our own wages. But, that's our job.
It's part
and
of
we
the
was
day. It's
very
one of the big-
unhappy with the day job at one point. So,
yeah.
Yeah. It's like at times when it doesn't feel like work, that's your competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Obviously, filming a podcast is quite good fun for a lot of people. But see the days where you're creating content,
yeah.
some people would.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I actually said this to you before we started this. I woke up this morning in a foul mood. I was in a
Couple of woo-woos from Weatherspoons.
couple of women from Weatherspoons fixed me up before the video, but I was in a terrible mood, and my other half, God bless her, we sold a watch yesterday evening, and it went out on the social medias. I was probably in the mood last night as well, and she came and she went, "Oh, you sold a watch?" I'm like, "Yeah," and she's like, You haven't told me, you're not informed. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just in a bad mood. And she gave me a reality check. She was like, Tom, if you'd have sold a watch a year and a half ago, you'd have been bouncing around this house, popping champagne and think,
Oh, we should tell the story about the first sale.
oh God, yeah.
Let's finish up on that. I'm up for that. But equally, that is a great point. Perspective and zooming out.
Perspective, and then, you know, we're only a year and a half in, and I'm just like, oh yeah, we sold a watch, cool. And then this morning I was at the petrol station, I'm like, oh, we just sold another watch. And you're like, yeah, that's great. And I'm like, yeah, and he's, no, you be great. And that makes me sound incredibly ungrateful, but then and I'm not trying to come across like that, and I am very thankful every day that I'm able to do this, but it's just like...
Well, like, retrospectively, like...
Yeah.
It could be like, when we do a video now, if a video gets 1 million views, like the first time we got 1 million views, it was like, that's awesome. Oh, I've just knocked the mic, sorry. It was like, that's awesome. And it's happened like, you know, a few more times since. And like, another video's got 1 million views, everyone's like, class in the WhatsApp chat, and that's it. It doesn't get mentioned again.
It's not hyped. Yeah, it's so funny. Okay, tell me about the first sale.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, what a story.
You scared the life out of me.
It was only like a week after we officially started this business as well. Like, we sold our first watch. Basically, we started the Instagram page, had about like 37 followers. A friend of mine, it's just a common theme within this business. A lot of my friends have bought watches, all very supportive. It's brilliant, by the way. Thank you to everyone. But a friend of mine found out we started the watch business. He was like, yeah, you know, I'm in the market for something vintage, you know, something Rolex. Of course we can do that. Of course we can do that. Didn't know how to do that. We was just like at square one, like, oh God, someone's actually asked us to find them a watch. And I was like, you know how to do this? And he was like, oh yeah, like, shouldn't you? And he was like, oh yeah, we'll do this, and this. Basically, we found the watch after a lot of panicking and fretting, and made sure it was perfect. And he was like, okay, so how does this work? We didn't have a website. We didn't have like a structure.
No, we didn't have the website.
No, we didn't have nothing.
Wow.
We was like, oh God, how does this work? And basically we set out a plan to him. It was like, oh yeah, this account, la da da da, pay your deposit, whatever, you know, pay us, we'll get you the watch, make sure it's all good to go. It's all serviced up. Everything's kosher. And he was like, yeah, all right. And I tell you what, when I heard that phone call about 8 o'clock at night in some Navy accommodation, heard that phone call, I was like trying to keep my cool, like so hard. I was like, yeah, all right, yeah, okay, all right, brilliant, mate, thank you, bye. Speed dial, Tom Watts picks up like, oh, what's going on? I'm like, yes. Like in my accommodation, there's people all around.
That wasn't accurate enough. It wasn't yes. I answered the phone. I've got my newborn sleeping child there in the room, my other half next to me. I answered the phone. I thought he was being murdered. He screamed, and I was like, what? What's going on? And he's like, he's bought it. And we were like, and I'm there screaming, newborn child, wide awake, screaming. Yeah. Mrs. there doesn't know whether to celebrate or pick up the child. She's just absolutely blown away. But we were, it was like, and that was it. And it was just that little feeling of, oh my God, we've made it. And then we went down and hand delivered it to, was it Portsmouth?
Yeah.
So that's but you got the good end of the deal on that.
I got dropped off at work.
You got dropped off at work. I had to go there and back to Portsmouth in the same day.
You would have flown back with the energy you had. But contrast that with how you felt last night. So really interesting. But that's the journey, the timeline, and where you're going. And I'm excited to see what's coming next. Yeah. For the listeners that want to carry on the conversation, where should they head towards? Well, they need to check out. This feels like the end of a YouTube video. Yeah. On Instagram, What's on Watches. TikTok, What's on Watches with 2 S's at the end.
Don't know who cocked that up.
If you're looking for a vintage watch, make sure that you check out whatsonwatches.co.uk or any watch. We're able to find absolutely anything. Just get in touch. We'll be able to sort you out. But whatsonwatches.co.uk. Check us out on YouTube as well, where you can listen to Josh and I and me rattle on about watches and our passions with them and talk to really interesting collectors. But yeah, that's where you need to find us. Beautiful, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you to the listener as well. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.